My name is Layla Morgan. I was 25 years old when I learned that someone could dismantle your entire life without ever touching you directly. I had just been discharged from the hospital after emergency surgery. Still weak enough that walking from the parking lot to my front door felt like crossing a much larger distance than it actually was. I remember pressing one hand flat against the hallway wall and holding my discharge papers with the other, telling myself that all I needed was my own bed, my own blanket, and the particular quiet of the first apartment I had ever paid for entirely by myself. I put my key in the lock. The door opened, and there was almost nothing inside. My living room looked like a unit that had been professionally cleared. My desk, the one I had saved 3 months for, was gone. My computer was gone. The drawing tablet I used for client work was gone. The sofa I had bought on sale after setting aside money for 6 entire months was gone. My closet stood open and empty. Even the cheap set of kitchen plates I had picked up on clearance the week I moved in were missing. For a full moment I genuinely believed I had opened the wrong door. My brain simply refused to process that this hollow, stripped-out space was mine. Then I saw the pale rectangle on the wall where a framed photograph used to hang. The paint around it had faded slightly in the light. The shape it left behind was the exact outline of everything I had just lost. My grandmother's silver locket was gone. The handwritten letters she had kept since the 1950s were gone. The old family photographs I had carefully protected through every single move, the ones that were proof I had existed before any of this, all of it was gone. I called my mother with my hands shaking. She answered like she had been waiting for the call. When I asked what had happened to my apartment, she laughed. Not nervously. Not guiltily. She laughed, and then she said, "Layla, you were playing at Independence." I just cleaned up the fantasy. Then she told me they had already sold most of it. My laptop. My furniture. My equipment. My clothes. Even the box with my childhood photographs. When I demanded to know how they had gotten inside, she explained that they had used the spare key I had given them years earlier for emergencies. They had told my landlord I had died from surgical complications. By the time the call ended and I tried to reach her again, I was blocked on every platform. I stood in the middle of my empty apartment with hospital tape still on my arm and understood something I had never been forced to understand before. The people who raised me had not made a mistake. They had made a plan. The first night I slept on my closest friend Dana's couch, I kept waking up thinking I heard my apartment door opening. My body was still fighting the infection. My stitches pulled every time I sat up too fast. And everything I owned fit inside one plastic hospital bag: my discharge papers, my phone charger, and the clothes I had been wearing when I collapsed. That was the complete inventory of my life that night. Dana told me I could stay as long as I needed. But I could see the worry on her face when I tried to log into client accounts from my phone and understood how serious the damage was. I worked as a freelance architectural renderer. My income depended entirely on software. Client files, project folders, contracts, and months of work stored on drives that were now gone. My computer was not just a computer. It was my reputation. It was my deadlines. It was the trust one had spent years building with clients who suddenly had no idea where their projects had disappeared to. In the first week after I came home from the hospital, I lost 3 clients. Then messages started arriving from people I had not spoken to in months. A cousin texted asking if it was really me. An old family friend called crying before I even said hello. A woman I had known since childhood sent a voicemail so broken I had to listen to it 3 times to understand. That was how I discovered the lie had grown far beyond my apartment. My parents had told relatives, former neighbors, church acquaintances, and most of their social circle that I had died. They said it had been sudden. They said they were devastated. They said they were trying to stay strong while processing an unbearable loss. The same mother who had laughed at me over the phone had posted an old photograph of me from high school with a caption about how no parent should ever have to bury their child. The same father who had helped carry my belongings out of my apartment was receiving sympathy cards from neighbors who believed he was grieving. Their neighborhood group organized a meal delivery. A woman from their charity circle quietly collected donations to help with expenses. People sent money because they believed I was dead. I sat on Dana's couch wearing sweatpants she had loaned me, scrolling through screenshots my cousin had sent, and felt something inside me go completely still. There were comments calling me a beautiful soul. There were heart emojis. There were people saying my parents were so brave for holding themselves together. There were strangers offering prayers for a family that was not grieving at all, it was performing. I was alive, broke, weak, and sleeping under a borrowed blanket while they were being comforted for a death they had invented. When I tried to contact relatives directly, the story shifted. Once people started asking questions, my parents told them I was alive but unstable. They said grief had made them confused. They said I had always been difficult and dramatic. They said I had abandoned the family and was now harassing them out of spite. In the space of 1 week, I went from dead to unstable to vindictive, depending on which version was most useful to them at any given moment. Dana drove me back to my apartment so I could photograph every empty room. The landlord looked like he wanted to disappear when I showed up alive. He confirmed that my parents had presented themselves as my next of kin, used a spare key they had held for years, and told him they needed to clear my belongings quickly because looking at my things was too painful. He had believed them because ordinary people do not lie about their daughter dying in order to take a sofa and a laptop. I walked out before I said anything I would regret. For 3 months I rebuilt from nothing. I bought a second-hand laptop that could barely run my design software. I took work far below my skill level because I needed cash immediately. I ate cheaply and I made a list of every single item they had taken. The expensive things hurt. But the ones I kept returning to in the middle of the night were the ones that could never be replaced. The locket. The letters. The photographs of me as a child that were proof I had existed before my parents decided to erase me. That was when my anger changed. It stopped being hot. It stopped making my hands shake. It became cold, precise, and permanent. I stopped asking why they had done it. I started asking how to prove it. The police report did not go the way people expect when they hear a story like this. I walked into the station with hospital records, photographs of my empty apartment taken the day I came home, screenshots of my mother's memorial posts, and a written inventory of stolen property so detailed it looked like a moving company manifest. I was calm. I was organized. I had spent weeks preparing exactly this. The officer listened carefully and took notes. Then he began asking the kinds of questions that told me where the conversation was heading. Had my parents held a key to the apartment? Had I ever allowed them inside before? Were any of the items originally gifts from them? Could there have been some kind of misunderstanding about my wishes? I gave him the same answer to every variation of that question. A misunderstanding does not explain telling my landlord I had died. A misunderstanding does not explain selling my grandmother's locket. A misunderstanding does not explain blocking my number the moment I asked for my belongings back. He did not say he believed them. He also did not say he believed me. He told me it might be a civil matter because they had been given access previously and because proving ownership item by item would be complicated. I left with a report number and the cold understanding that my parents had chosen their method of cruelty very carefully. Not the kind that gets handled quickly. The kind that gets buried in paperwork and process while everyone around you suggests you calm down and consider their perspective. Dana found the attorney. His name was not important to me in that first meeting. What mattered was that he read through my folder without interrupting, listened to the entire account, and then said, "They counted on you being too exhausted to fight back." That was the first time anyone had described what happened with accurate language. He explained that the criminal process might be slow or uncertain, but civil court operated differently. If we could demonstrate that my parents had taken property belonging to me, sold it without authorization, damaged my income in measurable ways, and used deliberate deception to gain access and collect sympathy funds, we had a case. It would not be fast. It would not be simple. And it would cost money I did not have. Dana loaned me the retainer without being asked. I cried when she handed me the check, not because I was fragile, but because after months of being treated like a problem to be managed, someone was willing to bet real money on the truth of what had happened to me. The lawsuit ran for nearly 2 years. 2 years of my parents attempting to reframe theft as parental concern. 2 years of them claiming they had only removed my belongings because they genuinely believed I would need a stable home to return to. 2 years of their attorney suggesting that because I had been hospitalized, my recollection of what I owned might not be entirely reliable. I read that line in a legal filing and felt nothing except clarity. But I had receipts. Bank statements showing I had purchased my own desk, my own equipment, my own furniture. Photographs of my workspace taken the week before surgery for a client portfolio. Emails from clients referencing files stored on my drives. My landlord's written statement confirming my parents had told him I died. Screenshots of online listings where my mother had sold my furniture in bundled lots. One buyer had even responded to my attorney confirming he had purchased a box described in the listing as part of an estate clearout, and estate clearout. I was 25 years old and alive, and my mother had sold my childhood as if I were already gone, when the judgment came. I read it 3 times before I allowed myself to fully accept it. $43,000. Property value, lost income, documented emotional harm, and a portion of legal costs. It was not enough to bring back the locket. It was not enough to restore the letters or the photographs. It was not enough to return the months I had spent building a life from someone else's couch, but it was official. It was written by someone they could not charm, could not confuse, and could not outlast. My parents appealed, of course they did. They called the amount excessive. They said the court had misread their intentions. They said I was punishing them rather than seeking any genuine resolution. They lost the appeal. When the judgment became final, I did not celebrate. I sat at my second-hand desk, set the court order beside the one scanned photograph of my grandmother I still had, and said quietly to no one in particular, "Now we collect." The part people outside these situations rarely understand is that the loudest moment is almost never the most important one. My parents had expected me to scream. To show up at their house. To send dramatic messages. To give them every opportunity to paint me as the unstable one, the difficult daughter who had always been too much. I did not give them that. For 3 years, I became very quiet. I made folders. I organized timelines. I saved every screenshot, every message, every post in which they had performed public grief over a daughter they knew was alive. I got full copies of my medical records. I kept every court filing in labeled envelopes. Then I began repairing the damage one person at a time, not with emotional appeals. With evidence. To my aunt, I sent the hospital admission and discharge dates alongside the dates my mother had posted about my death. To a family friend, I sent the court judgment. To a cousin who had once accused me of cruelly impersonating myself, I sent the screenshot of my mother's memorial post beside the date she listed my desk online for sale. Some people apologized immediately. Some went silent because silence was more comfortable than accountability. Some said they believed me but still wanted me to move forward, which was a gentle way of asking me to protect them from the discomfort of having participated in a lie. Then enforcement began. A lien was placed against my parents' property. My father's wages were garnished. Their bank accounts were reached through proper legal channels. Suddenly the consequences were not emotional. They were financial, public, and entirely impossible to explain away with a soft word like misunderstanding. My father worked in mortgage lending. His professional reputation depended on the image of trustworthiness. That image was now attached to a civil fraud judgment, active wage garnishment, and a neighborhood full of people quietly asking why the family they had mourned was now collecting money against her own parents in court. The neighbors who had delivered meals began asking questions. Someone shared details of the judgment in a local community group. The charity circle removed my mother from her committee. People who had donated to the memorial collection wanted answers. Lies are easy when everyone is sad and no one asks for documentation. They become significantly harder when court orders start arriving. Then my brother called. I had not heard his voice in 3 years. Not once after the hospital. Not once after the empty apartment. Not after any of it. He was crying so badly I could barely understand him at first. He told me our mother had been hospitalized. He told me our father was not sleeping. He told me the lien, the garnishment, the neighborhood questions, the professional consequences, all of it had to stop. He said I was destroying the family. I waited until he finished, then I asked him one question. Did you help carry my things out of the apartment? The silence that followed told me everything. His eventual answer confirmed. He whispered that he had not understood what was happening. He said he thought our parents were handling a situation. He said he had been confused. I told him I would call him back. I did not call him back. They had spent 3 years telling people I was dead. I wanted them to understand that the dead, when they return with documentation, are in no particular hurry. I agreed to meet my parents at their home 4 days later, on my schedule, not theirs. When I arrived, my brother opened the door before I knocked. My parents were inside with 2 people from their neighborhood circle, a woman my mother had organized charity events with, and a man who had served on the local HOA finance committee. They had not invited witnesses for honesty. They had brought an audience for their performance. My father said neutral people would help everyone move toward healing. I told him there was nothing neutral about people who had donated to a memorial fund for a woman currently standing alive in front of them. My mother began crying. My father spoke about family suffering and mistakes and moving forward. I asked him which mistake he meant specifically, and then I named them one by one. The spare key. The landlord. The listings. The memorial posts. The sympathy money. The man from the HOA shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My mother said she had been under impossible financial pressure. She said the credit cards were maxed. She said my father's commissions had slowed and she had been trying to hold the family image together. She said she made one terrible decision. I told her one terrible decision was buying something she could not afford. What she had done required a key, a truck, a phone call to my landlord, an online listing, and a public post about my death. That was not one decision. That was a sequence of choices, each one made after the last. My father offered to settle privately. He said the judgment amount was impossible for them to pay. He suggested reducing the figure, pausing the garnishment, arranging something quiet between family members. I asked if he meant the kind of quiet arrangement where they kept their house and I stayed silent about what they had done. He said I was twisting his words. I said I was finally repeating them without the softening. My brother said I was impossible. He said everyone in that room was trying to move towards something better and I wanted nothing but pain. I looked at him and said, no. I wanted $43,000. That is the number a court assigned to what your family took from me. I am not interested in a lower offer. My mother said I had become someone she did not recognize. I said the person she raised came home from surgery to find her apartment empty and her family telling the neighborhood she was dead. She looked away. That was the closest she ever came to something that looked like shame. The foreclosure became final the following spring. I drove past the house on the day they had to be out. My brother saw me from the driveway. He walked over and asked what I was doing there. I told him the truth. I wanted to see it. 3 years earlier I had stood in a gutted apartment with hospital tape on my arm. No one in my family had come to witness what they had done to me. So yes, I wanted to see the house they had protected with my stolen belongings empty under its own weight. My father came down the driveway and asked if I was satisfied. I told him I was not satisfied. I was simply present, the way he had not been when I needed him. He asked what more I wanted. I told him I wanted him to stop describing the foreclosure as something I had done to him, and start understanding it as something he had built, one lie at a time. Then I got in my car and left. I have a new apartment now. Furniture I bought again. A workstation better than the one they sold. A locked box for the documents that matter. I never recovered my grandmother's locket. I never got the letters back, but I learned something I will carry for the rest of my life. Family is not a title that protects people from accountability. Forgiveness is not something others get to demand simply because consequences make them uncomfortable. And justice does not always look like a confrontation in a hallway. Sometimes it looks like labeled folders, a patient attorney, and the quiet satisfaction of watching a court order do exactly what it was written to do. My parents wanted me to disappear so they could keep their house, their standing, and their version of the story. The truth took all 3 from them. I did not destroy my family. I simply refused to help them hide what was already broken.